gentlemen. Let us start with the last series of presentations. Here, the president of French company Safer, Monsieur Hyest, and Mr. Jegouzo from the same company.
Hello, I'm very pleased to be here in Prague to this conference. I am a French farmer in Normandy, and I am the president of the Safer in France. The Safer is a company, and we explain after what is this company. The principal rules is the protection of the land and the regulation of the use of the land.
Good afternoon. So I work with Mr. Hyest. I'm a research engineer in the National Federation of Safer, and we are here to present you what Safer are and what is their role in the regulation of land markets in France. So we'll see a presentation in three parts. First, I will present you what Safer are. Then we'll see what they actually do for the regulation of land markets in France. And in the third part, we'll see the challenges for French agriculture and rural territories. So let's begin with the presentation of Safer. Safer, briefly, they were created at the beginning of the 1960s. They're non-profit private companies in charge of public service missions. They act on rural land market in favor of farmers' projects and farmer settlement policies, but also in favor of environmental issues and economical development. Not only agricultural, but rural economical development. Farmers, representatives, and local authorities take part in the board of directors of every Safer, and the French government controls the activity of every Safer. So you can see on this map that there are actually 13 Safer in continental France. There are 13 regions in France, and there is one Safer per region. And there are also 3 Safer overseas, and another one in construction, also overseas. And Mr. Hyest is the president of Normandy, the Safer of Normandy. He's the president of this Safer and the president of the National Federation of Safer. So let's travel a little back into the past to understand why and how Safer were created in France. After the Second World War, there was a food shortage in France. There were 7 million people living out on farming, but there was also a huge rural-urban migration. A lot of people leaving the rural area towards cities. There were 2 million parceled out farms with an average size of only 15 hectares. I say only because nowadays the average size is 63 in France. There was a young farmers movement, very strong, who wanted better life conditions for farmers, and they also wanted a modernized agriculture. And there was a project of European Common Market that was created in 1957. So the French state at that time and young farmers shared the will of modernizing the farm structures in order to increase food production, to make French agriculture competitive, to reach a decent standard of living in comparison to urban areas, and to promote 2 working unit family farms. So Safer were created at that time, and they were part of a strong policy that began in 1946 when the rules on land tenancies were created, and they are still implemented nowadays. Safer were created in 1960 in order to regulate the farmland market. And 2 years later, a preemption right was granted to Safer in order to reinforce their capacity to control and allocate land. I will speak of these rights a little bit later. Nowadays, these are the 4 missions fulfilled by Safer. The first one is the historical mission. That was the only one mission when they were created, which is the development of and protection of agricultural and forest areas. And then came other missions. The second one in the history was local development, which is the third one on this slide. And there is also the environmental and landscape protection, which is the second mission on this slide. And the fourth mission is the rural land market transparency. I will tell you a little bit more of this mission. What you need to understand is that Safer nowadays doesn't only address agricultural issues, they really address rural issues, agricultural, environmental, or development issues. A little bit about Safer status. So they are private limited companies, but with a public service missions. They're non-profitable. That means that no dividends can be distributed to shareholders. They're subject to public authorities agreements, and they're under the control of the French state, with 2 ministries, Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Finance. About their governance, there is 1 board of directors for every Safer, maximum 24 members, distributed into 3 colleges, 1/3 for every college. These colleges represent every actor of the rural world. So the first college is constituted with representative farmers' unions and elected farming organizations. The second college is constituted with local authorities, cities, departments, regions. And the third college is constituted with the French state, with the National Federation of Safer, environmental organizations, banks, hunters' unions. So this board of directors gives an agreement on all purchases, sales, and leases done by the Safer. So there is 1 board of directors for every Safer, and the most important place in every Safer is what we call the Departmental Technical Committee. There are around 100 departments in France, and so there is nearly 1 Departmental Technical Committee for each department. So there are 95 committees in France. This is what we call the land democracy. This is really where the land democracy is. It is the place where all the members of this committee who represent the shareholders, the local representative of the shareholders and of the French state, decide, well, give an opinion on all what Safer can buy and sell, after analyzing all applications, because in France, the Safer first has to publish public announcements to say, we have this land to sell, for instance. Any person can send an application, can be candidate to buy this land, and then the technical committee gives an opinion and say, I think we should sell this land to Mr. Dupont, because he has the better project for the territory. So this committee is really what we call the Land Democracy Committee. It gives an opinion, and then this opinion is agreed by the board of directors. What is the role of the French state in Safer? French state accredits legal status, president and director. He accredits the long-term action program of every Safer. He approves every preemption on every purchase superior to 75,000 euros. He approves all sales and has a veto power on every sale project. And he takes part in the board of directors and gets an overview of Safer activity. I'm being quite quick in order to be able to present everything. What is important to know also is how Safer can really act on the market. So to fulfill the 4 missions, Safer are able to buy amicable or through preemption right. So they can buy agricultural land, forests, or rural real estate, bare land or land with buildings, and they can also buy shares of agricultural companies. Safer are able to stock land up to 5 years. They are able to allocate land after public announcement through sale or through lease. And they can also facilitate lease between a tenant who is looking for a farmer. The slide, there is a mistake on this slide. To facilitate lease between a tenant and a farmer. Temporarily manage land of public or private landowners and help local authorities in their rural development issues. So how Safer actually do for regulation of land markets? First, you need to know that in France we consider that the regulation can be divided into 3 steps: transparency, control, and allocation. The transparency is the knowledge of every sale across the rural area. Control is the capacity to stop a certain kind of sales because they are not compliant with the public policy. And then allocation is the allocation of lands towards projects that are compliant with these policies. So as for the transparency, every Safer legally receive every preliminary sale contract in order to decide whether to use the preemption right or not. For instance, last year, Safer were sent more than 300,000 preliminary sale contracts. They're sent by notaries, and there were also sent 7,200 contracts of share deals. What do we do with all this information? At a national level, we are able to calculate and publish an official farmland mean value in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture. We also publish an annual analysis of land markets. We do press conferences. We have meetings with members of parliament in order to tell them what we see on these markets. And at a local level, it also allows Safer to give local authorities a real-time knowledge of their territory. For instance, if a city wants to know what is happening in its territory, it can ask Safer to transmit the information of every sale of rural estate going on his territory. Just 2 examples of what we do with all this data. This is an overview of last year's rural land market in France, divided into 6 subsegments. So for instance, you can see in green the arable land and meadows market, 90,000 transactions for 400,000 hectares, for instance, and nearly 5 billion euros. That's just an example of what we can do with this data. And the next one is the map. You recognize France, and this is the price of non-rented land in euros per hectare. So the price, this is official price published with the Ministry of Agriculture, based on all the transactions recorded every year. So I remind you that transparency for us is the first step of regulation. The second step is control, and control is operated through the preemption right. So I think it's important for you to know what the preemption right is. It was granted to Safer with the 1962 law, and what it means is that it enables Safer to stop sales of real estate that are considered not compliant with public policies. Technically, and it means that if a seller has agreed with a buyer on a price, then there is a preliminary sale contract that is transmitted to the Safer by the notary. That's a legal obligation. And when the SAFER receives this preliminary sale contract, it has 2 months to decide whether or not it will activate this right. And if it activates this right, it means that the SAFER will tell the owner, the seller, that he will not sell to the buyer he had identified, but he will sell to SAFER. Obviously, this right is very strictly, it must be, there are, how can I say that? It's very strictly limited, and it must be motivated by one or several objectives that are written in the French law. For example, we can activate this right if we can prove that this land that would be sold to build a house, actually it could be useful to settle a farmer. That's an example of how we can use this right. There is also the capacity, when we activate this right, to reduce the sale price. That means that we can ask the seller to sell it at a lower price. Since 2014, the preemption right was extended to sales of shares of agricultural companies only when 100% of these shares are sold together. Just a few figures about this preemption right. Last year, there were nearly 1,400 purchases through preemption. Out of the whole annual purchases by SAFER, that's 12% of what we buy. The rest is bought through amicable negotiation. The procedure of reduced price has an impact that you can see here on this slide. The possibility for SAFER to ask for a lower price has a direct impact on the level of price in France. You can see in pink, nearly at the bottom of the slide, the mean price of arable land in France. So you see that it's nearly the lowest price across Europe. And that's a consequence, a direct consequence of the regulation by SAFER. The third part of regulation is land allocation. SAFER implements allocation through the purchase, the stock, and the sale of land, but also by leasing facilitation. As you have understood, allocation is, we choose a candidate within the technical committee, then this allocation is approved by the board of directors. And when we sell or if we make a leasing contract, we can ask, we do it, we put a 10-year contract that guarantees that the land will be used as agricultural land. And for specific contracts, we can also ask for a duration of up to 30 years. For instance, if we want to protect environmentally a land, we can ask that the land will be used with specific environmental clauses. Just a few figures for you to understand what is the weight of SAFER activity within the whole land market in France. The first line is what SAFER buy. For instance, that's what they bought last year. 103,000 hectares last year. Out of what SAFER could have bought, that's 25% last year. 25% of the areas. So that's also an explanation for the former slide, because when we buy land, we sell it at the right price, and that's explained also why the prices are low in France, because SAFER activity weighs around 25% of what is sold every year in France. SAFER are then, first they buy, then they're able to stock land, and this is very important because if we want to settle farmers, we can stock land up to 5 years, and this is very important because it gives the possibility, for instance, to wait for the farmer to finish his education or also to constitute a plot sufficiently big enough to settle a farmer. So that's a very important possibility. And then in the end, SAFER sell land, and so you see on the third line that the major sales are directed to agriculture and forests, but also for local development and environment. I will skip these ones. So what are the challenges for French agriculture? What I will tell you is really we make statements based on our observation of the rural land markets. There are two major challenges. The first challenge is the urban sprawl, the development of urbanization for housings, public equipment, roads, railways. You can see on this slide in blue what SAFER record every year of agricultural and natural land sold to be urbanized. And in red, that's the total areas effectively urbanized every year. And so you can see that after the financial crisis burst out in 2007, areas declined, but for 4 years now they've been going up again, and that's a very big concern for us. The second concern, and that's the major one, that's the fact that the current regulation does not stop land concentration. In France nowadays we can distinguish 4 ways to access land. If you're a farmer and you want to farm land, there are 4 ways you can do that. There's the land market, which is the historical real estate market, land renting, share deals, that is to say to buy shares of agricultural companies, and there is contract farming. I will not go into details, I don't have time for this, about this slide, but you see that the land market, the first line, is the best regulated market in France because the regulation was created to regulate this market. At that time there was only this market. Nowadays 3 other markets have appeared, and the most problematic one is the third one, share deals. Why is it a problem? Because in France, you may know that, and it's a European trend, there are less and less individual farms and there are more and more agricultural companies. These companies are very useful if you're a farmer and you want to transmit your farm to your son, for instance, because it enables you to do it progressively. But it also enables the development of agricultural firms. What we call agricultural firms is a gathering of several farms under one major shareholder. That's what you can see on this slide. In red, you see the major shareholders, and this shareholder has participations in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 farms and other types of companies. This development of agricultural firms is directly related to the share deals and to the fact that the French regulation currently does not address well these share deals. Just to give you some figure about share deals in France, that's the mid column. There were 7,000 share deals recorded last year for 1.1 billion euros. In comparison, the historic land market, it's 1,000 transactions, 5.7 million. So you see that the share deals, they only represent 7% of the land market, but 20% of in value of the land market. So what is at stake is that in France, between 2020 and 2030, 1/3 of farmers will retire, okay? And at the very moment when the regulation does not control share deals. And these share deals enable an agricultural firm to take another farm, add it to its firm. So this deprives, this is an opportunity for a farmer that he won't be able to settle, and an agricultural firm will take the farm we could have used to settle someone, okay? So this is really the major issue in France. This will accelerate land concentration. the expansion of agricultural firms. There will be less farmers and more employees across rural areas, less biodiversity, and less vitality across rural territories. So there is, for us, there is an urgent need for a renewed land regulation in France. We have already made proposals, and we support the farmland bill announced by our French president in February. Thank you.